Good evening. I think I got to speak to everybody this evening, but I'm Amy Moritz, the director of the Center for Transforming Communities, and we are here to celebrate Shalom Zones. The reason for our celebration, or what kind of makes it the perfect time to do it, is that it's actually this day, November 6th, that two of the Shalom Zones that are here were commissioned. So 5 years ago today, and then several of the others also turned 5 this year. So as we get started with the main part of our program, I want to just encourage you guys to make yourself comfortable. If you need to get some more food, the restrooms are out around the corner. I think everybody saw that, so just make yourself comfortable. For those of you who went through the Communities of Shalom training 5 years ago, you might remember that we began each session with Shalom Imagination. You might say, what is Shalom Imagination? We use this phrase to represent two ideas. So one of them is imagination. My imagination, your imagination, our collective imagination. And we talk about Shalom Imagination as a way to capture how we imagine this work that we do together. It's a way to think about and approach the task at hand. An imagination for Shalom, for what is possible, for what God's dream for the world might look like in our little piece of it. A Shalom Imagination is something we cultivate and nurture. And I think what we celebrate today is only possible because of our commitment to constantly fine-tuning our collective imagination together about what could be. So the second way that we use the word Shalom Imagination is to talk about a time. So many of you know that we call the time Shalom Imagination a part of the meeting, the first part of a meeting or a gathering that we set aside to listen to stories and to share together how it is that we hear in a story, a biblical text, just our own experience, shalom. What are we learning about this word, shalom? What are we learning about where this story points us? How does it inspire us? And as a result of each of us speaking and sharing, our individual and collective understanding of shalom and our role in seeking it in this time and this place is nurtured. So as we move forward, I want to invite you to put on your shalom imagination and also enter into this time of shalom imagination with us. We're going to hear not just one story, but 5 stories. We have 5 Shalom Zones to celebrate. And our first story is from the Mason Caregivers Shalom Zone. This is in Mason, Tennessee. And as you watch this 3-minute video, I'd like you to listen for glimpses of shalom. Listen for the way that the people of this Shalom Zone say yes, yes to God's dream for their little piece of the world.
I don't know if you know anything about Mason, but Mason is sort of like a laid-back place.
We used to be a very vibrant community, and so over the years it's declined. But Mason Caregivers' vision is to see it be a vibrant place where people want to come.
We have made a change, starting with the mayor. We elected a new mayor, and things are moving along just fine, you know.
Well, I was a pastor at Spirit of Truth, United Methodist Church in Mason, and the district superintendent at that time called me and asked me if I wanted to go through the Shalom training at the Center for Transforming Communities.
Well, we did a revival here at this church with Pastor Jackson, and he was talking to us about what he was planning to do, and we was on board from the first day.
I got involved through Pastor Jackson, through the church. He was looking for representatives in all of the local churches. And my pastor, he approached me about representing our church.
And I decided to call and come down to this organization because I wanted to give back to my community some of the things God had given me.
Before Pastor Jackson and the Shalom Ministry, I've been a part of Mason for a long time. I've never known anyone to just come in and, have a heart for Mason.
Well, the early days, basically what we were saying, that the Mason hadn't had any kind of community activities that brought the whole community together in years. And so that's the first thing I share with the mayor, that we wanted to do some kind of community unity festival. And he would say, amen. He was right for it. He said, I don't mind doing something, but I just don't have the people in the city that are willing to do the work. Well, I said, the Mason caregivers will find the people to do the work.
See people come together and be excited about something happening here, and then, you know, we don't have many events. In fact, other than that one, we don't have any. The community doesn't have anything, and to see the community come out to respond to be a part of it is just awesome.
I remember when I was a kid, they used to have festivals downtown Mason, and people would come from Chicago, New York. They would come back here just for that particular day, and this is what I'm looking for. Our next unit, I'm looking for people to just come from everywhere, just to come back home and be a part of this.
The thing is to stay open to the flow of the Spirit and what He's bringing together, because it's about what God wants us to do, and it's not about us.
I just think that Mason Caregivers is a wonderful group to work for. And through it, if you are working and working for the good of those, then you get the fulfillment, and then you know that God is in the plan.
We're building something that Mason can be proud of, and a lot of people, you know, they're beginning to understand what we're about. They're beginning to come out and support. You know, they begin to ask about, well, what is the Shalom about? And we sit down and we tell them what it's all about. It's all about unity.
The reason we care is because we have been cared for. So therefore, we just trying to give back what we have been given.
We all respect each other. We love each other. We pray together. We go out and we have lunch together. We have dinner together. And I think that anytime there's 2 or 3 people, you know, that have the same goal, I mean, you can't help but to be successful. And this is where we are right now. I think we're very successful.
So those of you who have been part of Shalom Imagination Time know that we hear a story and then we share a few things about how we see Shalom. So I want to see who heard Shalom in that story. 1, 2, 3 people, just shout out. How did you hear Shalom in that story of the Mason caregivers? Sharing. Give it back. Give it back. Yes, thank you. Thank you. There is more to celebrate about this Shalom Zone and all of the Shalom Zones than there is time for this evening. But I do want to lift up a couple of things that I celebrate about the Mason caregivers. And one of those things is prayer. So you all may be familiar with the story of Nehemiah in the Old Testament and the rebuilding of the wall in Jerusalem. We find it a very instructive story about how we seek shalom. And at the beginning of this book, if you remember, Nehemiah learned that the survivors back in his hometown of Jerusalem are in great trouble, and the wall that surrounds their city is broken down. Before Nehemiah acts, he prays. In fact, it appears that he may have prayed for 6 months before taking action. When the Mason caregivers completed their Shalom plan and were commissioned 5 years ago, they did not rush into action. They prayed. Reverend Jackson shared with me that he felt that God had more to show them about how to proceed. What may have looked like lost momentum after completing their Shalom plan was actually a time through which God was preparing the people of Mason for the work that God would do through them. Have you heard the phrase before, go slow to go fast? In a recent visit to Mason caregivers, I see that they still operate like this today. They pause, they join hands and pray, and ask God to order their next steps. They pray in the beginning, at the end, and as many times in the middle as is needed. And what does this help them accomplish? the Unity Festival. You heard that mentioned. At the center of Mason's history and culture, they remember a great music festival that drew people from all around. This important time of community and celebrating was lost years ago. But this Shalom Zone is restoring that important part of their culture and sharing it with the next generation. This fall, they celebrated the 3rd annual Unity Festival. Another important thing to celebrate about this Shalom Zone is that 5 years ago, when they were putting their Shalom plan together, the Mason caregivers named a goal to see local elected and public officials be more representative of the community. And they set a goal of increasing accountability, trust, and transparency between public officials and citizens. Through their slow and steady efforts, the Mason caregivers had a hand in laying the groundwork for Mason's first African American mayor. Clarity of vision and slow and steady faithfulness to it. This group, in many ways, is just at the beginning of what they can accomplish together. So, people representing Mason caregivers, will you stand? So the Mason caregivers, as you all, Mason's in Tipton County. And so one of the challenges we've often had as we gather as a Shalom community, many of you can attest to it, is that it's a long drive from Mason. But we're so glad that Reverend Jackson is with us. And I would like for all of us to say to Reverend Jackson and all of the people that are part of the Mason caregivers this statement together. So will you join me? Thank you for your...
You know, this is about sowing seeds in these young people so that our future can be better than our present. All of our futures can be better than our present. And hopefully these kids will remember these seeds at some point and sow them in somebody else.
We've got an enrichment program going on right here at Hedgerow for about 5 years, and it is nothing but fun.
I got involved through Miss Love, Diane Love, and I enjoy working with kids, and I've worked with kids just about all my life.
I've always enjoyed working with children, and I've worked with children for 27 years at a daycare, at a church, and I just want to help out where I could.
I serve as a youth director at Capelville United Methodist Church, and I heard of the unique opportunity to join Club Hedgerow, and I've heard about their work with Kirby Middle School, and a lot of those students actually come to Club Hedgerow, and the apartment complexes right across from our facility, so it was a match made in heaven. I had to get involved.
It's really an opportunity for young people and adults to learn from each other. We're not trying to be a tutoring program. That's not what we do. What we do is try to develop character in our young people and in ourselves.
The adults that are part of the program, they all are really dedicated because most of them have been here since the very beginning. And the ones who haven't, they came along and they didn't have to. And they did it out of the out of the goodness of their hearts just to help us.
Miss Brenda, she's from Brownsville Church of Christ, and so is Miss Debbie and Miss Ann, and they are the nicest, sweetest ladies. So I like working with them here, and they make you just feel welcome when you join the club.
I think not only has the church helped us making it happen, but us making it happen has changed the attitudes of the people in the church. And so we're no longer a four-wall facility. We've come out of those walls and we've reached out to the community.
I think everybody thinks I'm crazy when I say this, but my wildest dream is that we would create a community where people do not have to fear, do not have to steal,
where people feel safe because they have created safe places. They have trusted each other and they've become neighbors together. That's my wildest dream. And you think about that and you think, well, that shouldn't be too hard. But for whatever reason, it is. But I just believe that it's possible. And God shows us glimpses every once in a while of those possibilities.
People working together for good is the most wonderful thing that can happen in this world today.
So, us making it happen, Shalom Zone. Where do you see shalom? Shout out in that story. What do you celebrate about us making it happen and them as shalom seekers? Anybody? Hope. Working together. Commitment. Thank you. Yeah, I say yes to that. I want to highlight a few things that makes me smile when I think of the Shalom Zone. And also note that the things that I mention about each Shalom Zone apply to almost all of them. And so I've just lifted up a few things that I really celebrate. And so one of the things that applies to this Shalom Zone and definitely applies to all the Shalom Zones is their commitment to youth. Some of you might have been part of the neighborhood engagements for shaping the future of education that we had back in the February. And the slogan that the design team came up with was, "Great communities create great education, and great education creates great communities." This Shalom Zone, us making it happen, has lived this from their earliest days, but I see them living it just a little differently. I think their slogan might be, "Great communities create great youth, and great youth create great communities." The adults of the Club Hedgerow program in this Shalom Zone will tell you that they gain as much from it as they give to the children. On any given Monday for the past 5 years, you can show up at Club Hedgerow and see adults and youth present, truly present with and for each other. How many spaces do we have where unrelated youth and adults gather on a weekly basis to nurture each other, sojourners in life? I hear many in Memphis talk about the need for this cross-generational opportunity, us making it happen. They don't just talk about it, they do it. Another thing that I celebrate about us making it happen is the unique partnership that they have formed with an apartment complex. Their programming is not inside the walls of the church, but instead it's inside the walls of a model apartment. For those of you who are church people, think about how many times we strategize about how to get those people inside the walls of the church. How do we get them in here? Well, the churches that make up us making it happen, they ask, how and where can we go? How can we get creative about going to where people are, not just for our sake, but not just for their sake, but for our own? So people here representing us making it happen, will you stand? And will you all join me in reading this response? Thank you for your
The conventional, I guess, take on Highland Heights is a community in transition, and that is it's sort of degraded from its glory days back in the 50s to a sort of a marginal community that where there's a high incidence of crime and poverty and that sort of thing. we have been able to understand and appreciate is the immense talent and resources that reside in that community. The resilience and creativity of the residents that live there, the many stakeholders, some of who live there and some of whom come into the community, provides a degree of resilience and creativity and synergy between these different groups that makes life really rich.
Well, I first heard about the Corner Shalom Zone. I met Fred at a neighborhood meeting, and Fred introduced me to the Corners. And from then, it kind of inspired me to want to do more in my neighborhood.
The Corners of Highland Heights Community of Shalom began 5 years ago. Basically, it was in, I guess, June of 2010. I was asked to participate in a Shalom training experience, training exploration, and looking at kind of what the community had experienced in recent years. It seemed to me like a really very promising way to revitalize the community in some very significant ways.
I lived in the community for around 40 years, but it was not until I came into the Shalom Zone that I really began to see myself as a true part of the community and to see my mind and my heart change about the way I looked at community and became involved in community.
The whole notion is to find and experience a community that is uplifting, that is healing, that is hopeful and encouraging, and to find ways in which the people's faith commitment and moral commitments and things like that can be a source of really stabilizing and energizing the community.
Well, growing up, the word shalom often meant peace. Peace because within peace you find love, and if you can find love, you can find unity. And if we can get that peace and love and unity together, it'll grow our neighborhood to be a better place.
By coming together and by working together, we can affect change. But it's only when we work together can we affect significant change.
I love seeing people coming together from different walks of life and us joining together to love on and serve our community.
If I had to name one key principle that will guide me for the next 5 years, I would say faith. Faith. It's not by sight.
That's the Corners of Highland Heights Community of Shalom. How do you see shalom in that story? What do you celebrate about their shalom seeking? Anybody? Tolerance. Togetherness. Diversity. Community. Thank you. Yes, so much to celebrate. The Corners has done a variety of activities over the last 5 years. Prayer walks, summer camps, tutoring at Treadwell, Boy Scouts, a town hall meeting, and much more. What this group has had a hand in nurturing over the past 5 years far exceeds what one might think is possible. This group, though small in number, is big on commitment and a willingness to give what they have to give. If you look closely, you will see that many current efforts in Highland Heights have benefited from this group's faithful presence and commitment to God's dream for the neighborhood. For example, this Shalom Zone's early commitment to inviting churches of all denominations to partner in the Shalom work led to a group of ministries and nonprofits who would gather monthly over lunch. And this in turn laid the groundwork for a larger collaboration known today as the Heights Coalition. Another example is a youth tutoring program called FirstWorks. You may have heard of FirstWorks, but what you may not know is the Corners Shalom Zone, this small group of committed and willing servants, provides the means for this program to operate in Highland Heights. Without them, there likely would not be a FirstWorks today. This group also brings their gifts to the Neighborhood History Project. Without their humble, gentle, guiding, and serving presence, this intergenerational project to capture the oral histories of the community would not exist. I celebrate this group's servant's heart, their servant leadership, a leadership that does not seek credit, but selflessly gives, enabling things well beyond their numbers to occur. People representing the corners. Will you stand as you're able? And will you all join me? Thank you.
Change is really what drives the people who work with the South Memphis Shalom Zone, the Center for Transforming Communities, and everyone. They seek to change the community, and you can only do that through love, and that's why the Shalom Zone means love to me.
The South Memphis Shalom Zone, my earliest memory of its start really was around an awesome conference table with a group of awesome individuals. From that time, I remember being there at the table and looking at how we could take this national model and really have some Memphis flavor to really draw from what had been United Methodist centered praxis to really open it up to a multi-faith effort around communities, and what could a Memphis take on Shalom Zone look like?
As I began to share my vision of what I wanted to see happen, what the Lord had given for me for this particular church and this community, it really mirrored the sentiments of what the Shalom Zone was all about and what they were doing.
For me, Shalom means abundance. It means peace. It means community, which for me, community means transparency and vulnerability. So I find all those things in Shalom. It's this wholeness. It's not perfection of community, but it's excellence. It's like with the resources I have, with the time that I have, with the best of my ability, what kind of effort am I putting forth to live out the kingdom of God? And whatever the outcome is, it's excellent when those principles are followed.
I am really involved with the community clothes closet, and we have community people come in. They sign up for the clothes closet. We are open Mondays and Fridays from 10 a.m. to 1. And the community person come in, they sign up, and they select items, and they can come in every 30 days and get their items. I think it's bringing about a level of peace that they didn't have when we did not have the clothes closet.
Before the Shalom Zone, I can remember that you couldn't throw a rock without hitting a church in South Memphis. But those churches, they really didn't connect as much as they probably should have. And I think that the collective power of the churches and the members coming together to form one community, that helped build more of a relationship between people who otherwise would not have talked to each other. And that, brings people together and solves problems that you thought were caused by something completely different other than just not communicating with someone else.
I think that the Shalom Zone has given us opportunities to show the real love and compassion of Jesus Christ. And that's the greatest joy I get from it.
Look now, 5 years from sitting around that awesome table, it's really humbling to say, you know what, I remember when I was a part of that foundation. It's a blessing.
In that story, what do you celebrate about the people of the South Memphis Shalom Zone in their seeking shalom? Where do you see shalom? Abundance. Practicality. Unity. Exuberance. Thank you. And I see connecting and sharing. These are two things that I celebrate about the South Memphis Shalom Zone. So early on, there was the connecting that began when Pastor Foster invited Pastor Ross to bring their churches together to form the South Memphis Shalom Zone. And a few years later, Pastor Foster invites Pastor Brown, and Pastor Ross invites Pastor Wilkins to bring their churches into the work of the Shalom Zone. And today, all the pastors continue to seek ways to invite other South Memphis churches to be partners in the work of seeking shalom. And then there are the people from the churches, too many to name tonight, connecting and working side by side in a common effort. There's also connecting to the community. As I reflect on all the initiatives this group has started, including the neighborhood festival, the clothes closet, the barbecue cook-off, the Thanksgiving service, the neighborhood history project, and so much more, I see first and foremost a vehicle for connecting. Connecting church to church, connecting the church to the neighborhood, connecting people to people, and connecting people to the abundance of their place. Connecting and sharing. All of the Shalom Zones have a lot to teach us and to teach others. And I am personally grateful to how you guys say yes when I say, can I bring a group of people to meet you who want to learn from you? And in the South Memphis Shalom Zone, sometimes the learners that visit are moved to tears. For the most part, the learners are people who know themselves to be called to congregational ministry. They are or they're going to be leaders in a church. In seminary, these students have had lots of opportunities to think about the theory of how the church can be significant to the world. And they've had a lot to learn and have learned a lot about being good leaders inside the walls of the church. What they dream about, but question if it is possible, is how to connect a church to its community. On a visit to the South Memphis Shalom Zone, learners come with a stored story of South Memphis in their minds. It's a story about a place in despair, a story of blight, poverty, drugs, violence. This is what they expect to see. What they discover is that there is also another reality about South Memphis, a reality that includes gardens, families, thriving children, festivals, a reality that includes churches coming together across denominational lines to work for the common good of the community. It shakes these learners up, and it moves some of them to tears as they see glimpses of shalom in a place that they thought had little hope. The theologian Walter Brueggemann writes in his book called Prophetic Imagination this quote: "The task of prophetic ministry is to nurture, nourish, and evoke a consciousness and perception alternative to the consciousness and perception of the dominant culture around us." South Memphis Shalom Zone, you live by a different imagination of what can be. By your action and witness, you undo the power of the dominant narrative about your place, and you energize your community toward a vision of shalom. People representing the South Memphis Shalom Zone, will you stand? And will you all join me in saying, thank you for your
It's just wonderful. I mean, it strengthens my faith in people. We've got something so special in this neighborhood. I mean, so special that if we could replicate this in every neighborhood in Memphis, people would come from all over the world wondering, what is it that you guys have? We want some of it. It can happen. It can happen.
You know, over the years, watching how this has developed, Shalom has developed in Binghamton, it's been pretty amazing. We've seen, number one, Caritas, which means love of all people. It was first a house of hospitality that was about being in the neighborhood, having Thursday evening meals together, opening up for anybody in the neighborhood, and just getting to know folks, and out of that knowing what kind of things we might do together. And in the midst of that, Carl Lawson comes along and says, he wanted to do something with urban gardening, and we begin to talk about what does it mean to get some people in the neighborhood into gardening, urban gardening, and we had, I guess, 6 families the first time we started a plot. And that all was connected to the fact that this building that we're in right now, which is the Center for Transforming Communities building called the Commons on Merton, that building had been taken over now. It was no longer the Office for Urban Ministries. Now that became the Center for Transforming Communities, which was doing shalom work in neighborhoods around the city, and began to develop the idea of this building as a partnership with organizations that were working for asset-based community development. Some of them just were working for the good of neighborhoods and for people around the city. All of these things, on the one hand, are independent of each other. On the other hand, they're all part of an ethos that had really begun with that shalom work, that early shalom work.
I know as an artist, one of the things that's very powerful for me is the visual. And so now that I think about it, the visual of all of this cooperative effort that goes on in this community really inspires my understanding of shalom. I can actually sense it because I can see it.
There have been so many things that have happened since I talked to Billy and Jeff that it's just amazing. People who've come into my life has changed 180 degrees.
One of the biggest lessons that I've learned as we've worked for Shalom is that Shalom really isn't a project. Shalom is a journey. And it really does involve patience and humility and curiosity and surprise. I already said at McMurton Gardens, we didn't have any plans to have 6 or 7 sites. We had one site in mind. We didn't have any plans to work with refugee kids. And there were times where we were not quite sure if this thing is going to take off, if it's going anywhere. And Carl and I would look at each other and say, well, let's see what happens. Let's keep going in time. It takes time. That whole sense of being Again, patient, curious, willing to be surprised, and having some humility in the midst of it, and saying, God, this is our journey with God. It's not a project.
The Binghamton Shalom Zone. In that story, where do you see shalom? Refuge.
Not giving up.
Not giving up.
Journey.
Journey. The Binghamton Shalom Zone was commissioned in 1999. They are the oldest Shalom Zone in Memphis. What you see today in this Shalom Zone is the result of 15 years of living, working, serving, playing, and worshiping together. Seeds planted 15 years ago have grown into visible and thriving programs, projects, nonprofits, things that witness to the shalom this community seeks together. This includes things like Caritas Village, McMurton Gardens, the Binghamton United Methodist Church, and the Commons. If you go back to the seed planting for each of these, you'll find the same handful of people practicing shalom, living together, committed to seeking God's dream for this community. To an outside observer, each of these examples I mentioned, Caritas Village, McMurton Gardens, and so on, they look like standalone ministries or standalone programs and nonprofits. But they are deeply connected, especially through the people who are active in these ministries. And if you also look deeply within and across each of these, you'll discover that they operate out of a shared set of principles and values, the same ones that the newer Shalom Zones use to guide them today. And even more importantly, these relationships extend into the community. The Binghamton Shalom Zone is a place where neighbors are known to each other. It's a place where people are accepted as they are, and diversity is celebrated. This Shalom Zone is not just a group of people. It's not just a handful of projects. It's a network. It's a network of interconnected people who recognize that what affects one directly affects all. People representing the Binghamton Shalom Zone, will you stand?